Penguin Random House Audio presents In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. Read for you by Alexander Skarsgard. The hole, a broken star on the ice, was the only interruption of the white plain merging into the white sky. No wind, no life, no sound. A pair of hands came out of the water and groped for the edges of the angular hole. It took the searching fingers some time to climb up the thick inner walls of the opening, which resembled the cliffs of a miniature canyon, and find their way to the surface. Having reached over the edge, they hooked into the snow and pulled. A head emerged. The swimmer opened his eyes and looked ahead at the even, horizonless expanse. His long white hair and beard were threaded with straw-tinted strands. Nothing in him revealed agitation. If he was out of breath, the vapor of his exhalations was invisible in the uncolored background. He rested his elbows and chest on the shallow snow and turned around. About a dozen chafed, bearded men in furs and oilskins looked at him from the deck of a schooner caught in the eyes a few 100 feet away. One of them yelled something that reached him as an indistinct murmur. Laughs. The swimmer blew off a drop hanging from the tip of his nose. Against the rich, detailed reality of that exhalation, and the snow crunching under his elbows and the water lapping on the edge of the hole, the faint sounds from the boat seemed to be leaking from a dream. Ignoring the muffled cries from the crew and still holding on to the edge, he turned from the ship and faced, once again, the white void. His hands were the only living things he could see. He pulled himself out of the hole, picked up the hatchet he had used to break the ice, and paused, naked, squinting at the bright, sunless sky. He looked like an old, strong Christ. After wiping his brow with the back of his hand, he bent over and got his rifle. Only then did his colossal proportions, which the blank vastness had concealed, become apparent. The rifle seemed no larger than a toy carbine in his hand, and although he was holding it by the muzzle, the butt did not touch the ground. With the rifle as a measure, the hatchet over his shoulder revealed itself to be a full-fledged axe. He was as large as he could possibly be while still remaining human. The naked man stared at the footprints he had left on his way to his ice bath, and then followed them back to the ship. A week earlier, against the advice of most of his crew and some outspoken passengers, the young and inexperienced captain of the Impeccable had steered into a strait where drifting slabs of ice, cemented by a snowstorm followed by a severe cold spell, had trapped the ship. Since it was early April, and the storm had merely interrupted the thaw that had set in a few weeks before, the worst consequences of the situation were a strict rationing of provisions, a bored and annoyed crew, a few disgruntled prospectors, a deeply worried officer from the San Francisco Cooling Company, and the shattering of Captain Whistler's reputation. If spring would release the ship, it would also jeopardize its mission. The schooner was to pick up salmon and furs from Alaska, and then, hired by the Cooling Company, ice for San Francisco, the Sandwich Islands, and perhaps even China and Japan. Aside from the crew, the majority of the men on board were prospectors who had paid for their passage with their labor, blasting and hammering off big blocks from glaciers that were then carted to the ship and stored in its hay-covered hold, poorly insulated with hides and tarps. Sailing back south through warming waters would decrease the bulk of their cargo. Someone had pointed out how peculiar it was to find an ice ship iced in. No one had laughed, and it was not mentioned again. The naked swimmer would have been even taller had he not been so bow-legged. Stepping only on the outer edges of his soles, as if walking on sharp stones, leaning forward and swinging his shoulders for balance. He slowly made his way to the ship. The rifle slung across his back and the axe in his left hand, and in 3 agile moves, climbed the hull, reached the railing, and jumped on board. The men, now silent, pretended to look away, but could not help staring at him from the corners of their eyes, although his blanket was where he had left it, a few steps away. He remained in his place, looking out beyond the bulwarks, above everyone's head, as though he were alone and the water on his body were not slowly freezing. He was the only white-haired man on the boat. Withered yet muscular, his frame had achieved a strangely robust emaciation. Finally, he wrapped himself in his homespun, which covered his head in a monkish way, walked to the hatch, and disappeared below decks. "So you say that wet duck is the Hawk?" one of the prospectors said, and then spat overboard, laughing. If the first laugh, when the tall swimmer was still out on the ice, had been a collective roar, this time it was a meek rumble. Only a few men shyly chuckled along, while the majority pretended not to have heard the prospector's remark or seen him spit. "Come on, Monroe," one of his companions pleaded, gently pulling him by the arm. "Why, he even walks like a duck," Monroe insisted, shaking his friend's hand off. "Whack, whack, yellow duck. Whack, whack, yellow duck," he chanted, waddling around, imitating the swimmer's peculiar gait. Now only 2 of his companions snickered under their breath. The rest kept as far from the joker as possible. A few prospectors gathered by the dying fire some men had tried to keep going in the stern. Initially, Captain Whistler had forbidden fire on board, but once it seemed they would be stranded in the ice for a while, the humiliated skipper had little authority to enforce the ban. The older men were members of a party returning to the mines they had been compelled to abandon in September, when dirt started to turn into stone. The youngest one, the only man on board without a beard, couldn't have been more than 15. He planned to join another group of prospectors hoping to strike it rich farther up north. Alaska was new, and the rumors wild. From the opposite end of the ship came excited cries. Monroe was now holding a scrawny man by the neck with one hand and a bottle with the other. "Mr. Bartlett here has kindly offered a round for everyone on board," announced Monroe. Bartlett grimaced in pain. "From his own cellar." Monroe took a swig, released his victim, and passed the bottle around. "Is it true?" the boy asked, turning to his companions. "The stories, what they say about the Hawk, are they true?" "Which ones?" one of the prospectors asked back. "The one where he clubbed those brethren to death? Or the one with the black bear in the Sierra?" "You mean the lion?" a toothless man interjected. "It was a lion. Killed it with his bare hands." A few steps away, a man in a tattered double-breasted coat who had been eavesdropping on their conversation said, "He was a chief once. In the Nations. That's where he got his name." Gradually, the conversation caught the attention of the men on deck, until most of them were gathered around the original group in the stern. They all had a story to tell. "He was offered his own territory by the Union, like a state, with his own laws and all, just to keep him away. He walks funny because they branded his feet. He has an army of cliff dwellers in the canyon country waiting for his return. He was betrayed by his gang and killed them all." The tales multiplied, and soon there were several overlapping conversations, their volume increasing together with the boldness and oddity of the deeds narrated. Lies, yelled one.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?